working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's program. President Joe Biden and his South Korean counterpart Yoon Suk-yeol warned North Korea it would face a nuclear response and the end of the leadership if Pyongyang uses its own arsenal. When Japanese journalist Kenji Nagai was shot dead by Myanmar troops as he covered anti-military protests in 2007, his video camera disappeared along with the last images he filmed. On Wednesday, 16 years and a secret journey out of Myanmar later, the camera and its contents were handed back to his family, who hope the footage will hold clues to the final moments of his life. And Malacanang today reported that the Philippine government has safely evacuated 409 Filipinos from war-torn Sudan. First in our news, President Joe Biden and his South Korean counterpart Yoon Suk-yeol warned North Korea it would face a nuclear response and the end of its leadership if Pyongyang uses its own arsenal. Speaking at the White House after Oval Office talks during only the second state visit so far in the Biden presidency, the two leaders said the U.S. security shield for South Korea was being strengthened in the face of the nuclear-armed North's aggressive missile tests. And they made clear that if the isolated communist dictatorship in North Korea attacks the South or the U.S., the response will be devastating. Let's listen in.
Attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies or partisans or partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action.
바이든 대통령님은 한국에 대한 철통 같은 확장 억제 공약을 재확인했습니다. 한미 양국은 북한의 핵 공격 시 즉각적인 정상 간 협의를 갖기로 했으며 이를 통해 미국의 핵무기를 포함하여 동맹의 모든 전력을 사용한 신속하고 압도적이며 결정적인 대응을 취하기로 약속했습니다.
President Yoon and President Biden issued what was titled the Washington Declaration, bolstering the U.S. nuclear umbrella over South Korea, which is increasingly nervous about the saber-rattling in the North. And this will include a mechanism for the two countries to share information and consult in event of a North Korean attack, even if U.S. commanders will still retain full control of the nuclear weapons. It will also see more integration of South Korea's conventional military with U.S. nuclear forces. When Japanese journalist Kenji Nagai was shot dead by Myanmar troops as he covered anti-military protests in 2007, his video camera disappeared along with the last images he filmed. On Wednesday, 16 years and a secret journey out of Myanmar later, the camera and its contents were handed back to his family, who hope the footage will hold clues to the final moments of his life. Let's listen in.
こうして市民がですね集結しています。
されまして、こちらにもありますけれども、16年経ちまして、もう全く希望は持てなかったんですけれども、働きかけだけして待ってましたが、ようやく巡り巡って A ちゃんナイさんのご苦労により出演することができました。兄も待ちに待っていたものと思いますし、このことを本当に家族全員で喜び合いたいと思います。お墓の前に備えてやりたいと思います。
Now, Nagai's sister, Noriko Ogawa, said she was thrilled and filled with joy to have retrieved her brother's camera. She had given up hope of ever seeing the footage, she said, after Myanmar authorities ignored her request to return it to her. Nobody has been charged in relation to Nagai's death, and Myanmar officials claim the killing was an accident.
事故だという扱いでこの17年、16年間来ましたけれども、明らかに私たちの立場としてはいろんな方向から考えても至近距離からの銃撃であったと思っております。 真実を見極めて真相を明らかにしていただきたいという気持ちです。
But an autopsy conducted in Japan showed that Nagai was likely shot dead from close range, around 1 meter or 3 feet. Footage retrieved from Nagai's camera was shown to media for the first time on Wednesday at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand in Bangkok. And it shows a huge crowd of demonstrators singing songs in downtown Yangon, facing off against police and soldiers carrying wicker riot shields and rifles. Some hoist flags bearing the peacock symbol of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy. Protesters bow before a line of saffron-robed monks, and a young child is seen collecting used plastic water bottles from the crowd. A convoy of Green Army trucks filled with troops then arrives at the scene to jeers and cries from the demonstrators. Nagai turns the camera on himself and points to the trucks. His last words in the footage are, "The army has just arrived. The army is over there. They are heavily armed." The camera was obtained by journalists from Myanmar news outlet, The Democratic Voice of Burma. Its chief editor, Ai Chan Nang, said he could not go into details about how they obtained the camera in order to protect sources in Myanmar, which is once again under military rule.
The reason we cannot, go deeper into how we get it. What I can tell you is we got it through a good citizen who knows what is right and what is wrong, and that's how we got it.
Meanwhile, U.S. and Philippine troops fired a salvo of rockets at a warship representing an enemy vessel in the disputed South China Sea. This is the final exercise of the Allies' largest ever military drills. It is the first time the countries conducted a joint live-fire exercise in the hotly contested waters, which China claims almost entirely. President Marcos, who has sought stronger defense ties with the U.S., sat in an observation tower with U.S. and Philippine officials watching the event north of Manila. Take a look.
The message that we are trying to send is that the alliance is alive and that we are always challenging ourselves. So one Balikatan is always going to be harder and more complex than the previous Balikatan. And that means that in every iteration of Balikatan, you will expect something different. We want to do this because we want to avoid staleness of the exercise, and we also feel the need to challenge ourselves in being able to operate at a different level.
The Philippine forces and U.S. forces have always been allies. And allies in this sense, in a very simplistic way of looking at it, is family. We all know that nothing can break family. And in the culture of the Philippines and in the culture of the United States, sometimes family is everything. You may not see your family every day. You may not talk to your family every day. But when your family calls you, you respond. And in this case, in this family matter, we've been called upon to train together, and we learn from that.
It is currently on the ground.
The live-fire drill kicked off with the U.S. HIMARS precision rocket system launching a series of rounds at a decommissioned Philippine Navy corvette anchored about 22 kilometers off the coast. The objective was to sink the decades-old ship, which represented an enemy vessel approaching the Philippine shore. And that was followed by artillery units lined up along a grassy field, firing rockets at floating drums 10 kilometers offshore. The U.S. military also showed off its Patriot missiles, considered one of the best air defense systems in the world. BALIKATAN follows a deal announced earlier this month for U.S. forces to use an increased number of bases in the Philippines, including one near Taiwan. China considers self-ruled Taiwan a part of its territory. President Joe Biden is set to become the first sitting U.S. president in at least a century to visit Papua New Guinea, according to Foreign Minister Justin Katchenko on today, revealing plans for a brief but symbolic trip. President Biden plans to stop in Port Moresby in May as he travels between a G7 summit in Japan and a Quad summit in Sydney, Australia. The foreign minister said he's coming on the 22nd in the morning and will be here for 3 hours only, adding that talks were expected to focus on the economy, security, and climate change. The presidential trip is a nod to Papua New Guinea's rapidly growing strategic importance as the U.S. and its allies tussle with China for influence across the Asia-Pacific. Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Port Moresby in 2018 to much fanfare with Chinese flags hoisted across the capital and his motorcade whizzing past gathered crowds. Now, the trip was seen as a major diplomatic coup for Beijing. U.S. and Australian officials have been concerned by a rapid uptick in Chinese investment in the resource-rich Melanesian nation. There have also been concerns that China has been trying to establish a military outpost, prompting Washington to float the idea of establishing a joint naval facility on Manus Island. According to State Department records, which date back to Theodore Roosevelt's administration in 1901, no sitting U.S. president has visited Papua New Guinea. In tonight's other news, China slammed a speech by Britain's foreign secretary that warned Beijing against any attack on Taiwan and raised human rights concerns, accusing London of clinging to the past. Asked about the set peace foreign policy address delivered by Mr. James Cleverly, China's foreign ministry said Britain was holding outdated scripts and reciting old lines. Take a look.
It would be clear and easy, and perhaps even satisfying, for me to declare some kind of new Cold War and say that our goal is to isolate China. It would be clear, it would be easy, it would be satisfying, and it would be wrong. Because it would be a betrayal of our national interest and a willful misunderstanding of the modern world. We must engage with China where necessary and be unflinchingly realistic about its authoritarianism. And that means never wavering from one clear principle. We do not expect our disagreements with China to be swiftly overcome, but we do expect China to observe the laws and obligations that it has freely entered into. This government will advance British interests directly with China, alongside our allies, while steadfastly defending our national security and our values. And we can expect profound disagreements. Dealing with China, I can assure you, is not a job for the faint-hearted.
This interwoven world with interlaced challenges calls for cooperation and joint response. Bloc confrontation, Cold War mentality does not serve the interest of all parties, including the UK. China has been growing its relations with the UK in a spirit of equality and mutual respect, but the UK has been holding on to the old playbook, which will lead them further away from the progress of the times. On issues related to Hong Kong, all clauses related to the British side in the joint declaration have been fulfilled, and the British side has no sovereignty, no jurisdiction, and no right of supervision on Hong Kong. And there is no such thing as obligation or things the UK is entitled to. Xinjiang enjoys economic prosperity, social stability, harmony between religious beliefs and cultural diversity. People there live happy and fulfilling lives. But the British side turns a blind eye to this and deliberately smears China. This is purely driven by ulterior motives, but it will never succeed and cannot change stability and development in Xinjiang.
Britain on Tuesday warned China against any attack on Taiwan, telling Beijing it risked triggering domestic and global turmoil if it failed to uphold its international obligations. In a set-piece, Foreign Policy Chief Foreign Secretary James Cleverly restated that London wants to see a peaceful settlement to sovereignty claims. China claims self-ruled Taiwan as its territory and has vowed to seize it one day by force if necessary.
The biggest threat to the peace across the Taiwan Strait is Taiwan independent separatist activities and connivance and support from external forces. The status quo of the Taiwan Strait is that the two sides of the Taiwan Strait belongs to one and the same China. If UK hopes to see peace and stability, it should abide by one China's principle and oppose separatist activities. I would like to say that these questions are purely China's internal affairs. We hope the British side would act with prudence and do more to contribute to the development of bilateral ties and the peace and development of the world.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has launched a credit scoring model that's expected to enhance credit risk assessment by lenders. BSP and the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, developed the Credit Risk Database, or CRD scoring model as part of a technical cooperation program, and it's expected to serve as an additional tool that lenders can use to analyze the creditworthiness of MSMEs. Let's listen in.
CRD scoring model will contribute to bringing funding gap to MSMEs, but it will also enhance credit risk management and financial institutions. If a lot of transactions are done by QR payments, this will generate a trail of financial information, which may also improve the quality of lending. In other words, many of these things put together will reduce the temptation on the part of legislators to have one-size-fits-all policy that are very well-intentioned but have a lot of unintended side effects.
Personally, I'm probably more attached to the terms SMEs than most people. Prior to my assignment as ambassador to the Philippines, I served 4 years at the headquarters of JICA. I was executive senior vice president of JICA from 2016 to 2020, where I led a project to promote expansion of Japanese SMEs overseas. During that time, I visited all 47 prefectures of Japan and learned a great deal through my dialogue with local SMEs in each region. Many of these companies had brilliant technologies and ideas, though they may not be widely known around the world. It is these SMEs that have mainly supported employment generations and economic growth in Japan. SMEs makes up 99.7% of all Japanese firms, employing 68.8% of all Japanese employees and contributing 52.9% of all value added. These numbers are almost the same as Deputy Governor mentioned in the Philippines. MSMEs comprise 99.6% of Filipino businesses and employ 64.7% of total Filipino workforce. These figures showed how SMEs serve as the backbone of our economies and how much potential abounds in them. I believe that the goal of CRD project is analogous to this, though it provides SMEs with appropriate financing instead of new market. Ensuring that such promising SMEs have access to appropriate financing is essential to fully harness the Philippines' economic potentials and realize its goals of financial inclusion.
The CRD utilizes a data-driven approach to boosting lenders' confidence in financing MSMEs, especially those without enough collateral. Mr. Medalla noted that there is a one-size-fits-all policy towards lending to small businesses in the country.
The problem is it becomes a one-size-fits-all policy. The most ridiculous example of that is a highly specialized Japanese bank, for instance, that has less than 100 employees because they're focused on lending to Japanese firms in the Philippines are being told to lend to MSMEs and agriculture. And most of them end up saying we must just pay fines. It's a terrible thing. It's a tax on foreign investors who want to help the economy. This one-size-fits-all policy.
Around 90% of adolescent girls and young women do not use the internet in low-income countries, while their male peers are twice as likely to be online. That is according to a new UNICEF analysis issued on International Day of Girls in ICT. Closing the digital divide between girls and boys is about more than just having access to the internet and technology. It's about empowering girls to become innovators, creators, and leaders, according to UNICEF Director of Education Robert Jenkins. The report, Bridging the Digital Divide, Challenges and an Urgent Call for Action for Equitable Digital Skills Development, takes a close look at the gender digital divide among young people aged 15 to 24 years by analyzing available data on internet use, mobile phone ownership, and digital skills in mostly low, lower, middle, and some middle-income economies. Though more gender disaggregated data is needed to better monitor, understand, and work toward digital inclusion, the report finds that girls are being left behind in an increasingly digital and connected world. WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, along with Immunization Agenda 2030 and many other global and national health partners, are joining forces to call for the Big Catch Up, a targeted global effort to boost vaccination among children following declines driven by the pandemic. Our correspondent from North America, Rosel Feria, reports from Washington, D.C.
In 2021 alone, the World Health Organization says over 25 million children in more than 100 countries are missing at least one vaccination. Outbreaks of preventable diseases are already becoming more prevalent and severe. These diseases include measles, diphtheria, polio, and yellow fever. In an effort to reverse the declines in childhood vaccination recorded since the COVID-19 pandemic, several global and national health partners are joining forces to call for the Big Catch Up. The Big Catch Up is a targeted global effort to boost vaccination among children following declines driven by the pandemic. The said effort will have a particular focus on the 20 countries where 3/4 of the children who missed vaccinations in 2021 live. These countries are Afghanistan, Angola, Brazil, Cameroon, Chad, DPRK, DRC, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, Somalia, Madagascar, Mexico, Mozambique, Myanmar, Tanzania, and Vietnam. WHO Chief Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says catching up is a top priority and that no child should die of a vaccine-preventable disease. Organizations heading the effort include WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, along with Immunization Agenda 2030. Rosel Feria, Washington, D.C., Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Cambodian leader Hun Sen today canceled a law he created just 2 months ago to protect critically endangered Mekong dolphins as the mammals continue to die from illegal fishing activities. Now, Hun Sen issued a new decree in February creating protection zones in a 120-kilometer stretch of the Mekong in which fishing is banned following the death of 3 dolphins in a week. Conservationists have also stepped up efforts to protect the mammals, small, shy creatures with domed foreheads and short beaks that once swam through much of the river all the way to the delta in Vietnam. But 2 dolphins have since died, including a 4-day-old calf found dead last week and tangled in fishing nets. Now, Prime Minister Hun Sen said Thursday he had decided to cancel the new decree because dolphins keep dying and thousands of fishing families were affected. He said dolphins keep entangling in gill nets despite the ban. He added, referring to nets strung across the river by fishermen. Hun Sen said the law also affected thousands of families who depend on fishing in the Mekong. Hansen asked authorities to implement old regulations to ban fishing in parts of the dolphin zones and to crack down on electrofishing. 11 dolphins died in 2022, bringing the total number of dead dolphins to 29 in the last 3 years, according to the World Wildlife Fund. Malacanang today reported that the Philippine government has safely evacuated more than 400 Filipinos from war-torn Sudan. According to a Presidential Communications Office news update, some 335 overseas Filipino workers and family members left Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, for Egypt via Wadi Halfa Highway, while another 35 OFWs and 15 students were evacuated to Egypt with the help of Filipinos in Sudan and personnel from the Department of Migrant Workers. DMW Secretary Susan Ople and Undersecretary Hans Leo Kakdak are currently in Egypt to lead the distribution of welfare assistance to evacuated OFWs. In a press briefing in Malacanang, Ople said President Marcos Jr. directed them to quickly bring all affected Filipinos in Sudan to safety.
So the President's directives were, number one, to get all of them to safety as quickly as possible. Number two, it shouldn't matter whatever papers they have, or if they don't have any papers at all, to quote the President, kung marunong mag-Tagalog, marunong mag-Bisaya, marunong mag-Ilocano, marunong ng iba't ibang dialect sa atin, Pinoy yan. So we will help.
Ople assured that those who are not in possession of any passport or identity card will still be given aid, and that their documents will be taken care of when they reach the border, with the Department of Foreign Affairs taking the lead.
And doesn't really matter if they are in possession of a passport or any identity card. Aayusin na lang namin pagdating sa border. Of course, the DFA will take the lead on that.
The Philippine Embassy in Egypt has jurisdiction over Filipinos in Sudan. The Philippine Embassy in Egypt has also made representations with the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to facilitate the temporary entry into Egypt of Filipino nationals. The embassy is eyeing the deployment of assistance to national teams in 2 locations, in Wadi Halfa and Port Sudan, to provide further consular assistance to evacuating Filipinos. Efforts are also continuous to secure more buses for evacuation. Also on Wednesday, the French Embassy in Manila said 2 Filipinos were able to join France's ongoing rapid evacuation operations in Sudan. The World Health Organization said it was assessing the threat posed to public after fighters in Sudan occupied a national laboratory holding samples of deadly diseases. Take a look.
WHO is also concerned about the occupation of the Central Public Health Lab by one of the parties in the conflict. Technicians no longer have access to their laboratory, which means the lab is no longer able to perform its normal diagnostic and reference function. We're also concerned that those occupying the lab could be accidentally exposed to pathogens stored there.
We are aware of some samples of pathogens that are being stored in the lab: measles, COVID, so SARS-CoV-2, TB, particularly MDR-TB, cholera, and vaccine-derived poliovirus. But the assessment is ongoing to better understand what the public health risk might be with those, and of course the risk as well of having untrained personnel or untrained individuals in the lab mishandling some of these samples, potentially leading to themselves exposing themselves to those infections, is also a risk.
Remember here, internet, telephones and other things are down. In Sudan, communications are extremely difficult. Doing any kind of assessment at the moment on health status is very difficult. And again, the reason for that is violence. The reason for that is warring factions fighting over territory, fighting over control of Khartoum and other cities. Unfortunately, it is the civilians of Sudan that are in the firing line. It is the health system in Sudan that's in the firing line. And the major risk to the health and welfare of the people of Sudan remains a conflict.
His comments came a day into a 72-hour ceasefire that was struggling to hold after the regular army launched renewed airstrikes against rival paramilitary forces in the capital, Khartoum. The nearly 2 weeks of urban combat has killed hundreds, wounded thousands, and sparked a mass exodus of foreigners, while the UN has warned a giant new refugee crisis could be brewing. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.